between all the different other photovoltaic, hydropower, bioenergy, CSP, and geothermal. 25 million people is a lot of people who will be working in these sectors. And of course, most of them are not organized yet because they don't exist yet. But we have to have plans on how we as trade unions can attack this, both from a technological point of view, but also from an organizational point of view. And this is one of the important things that we need to discuss here. This goes for the whole supply chain of the renewables. And I hope that the seminar today will be a start of a strategic development from IndustriALL side on how we deal with renewables and how we deal with building union power in the renewable sectors. Matthias is here, Matthias Hartwig, to say a few words on the link here between this and the green tech that he is responsible for. Diana Honkere is here, our director for energy, to make the links, because this is of course an energy question. And then I hope we have, and then we'll have expert comments from renewable energy, on renewable jobs, energy in the energy transition from the IRENA. And I've heard Khan say that this is a very interesting presentation that we're going to hear. So I'm really looking forward to that. Unfortunately, I can't be with you all the time because if you see behind me, I have an IndustriALL Women logo. I am in the Women's Committee and I have to go a little bit back and forth to the Women's Committee where they have just elected new co-chairs for this Congress period and have interesting discussions that I have to be part of. But I'm sure that Khan, Matthias, and Diana will update me on all the interesting discussions that will be taking place in this meeting today. So I'm really looking forward to following this. This is a startup, but this will have to be followed up by work, both webinars and desk work on renewables to come up with the real strategies and how we attack the growth in renewable energies. So with that, I give the floor back to you, Khan.
Well, thank you very much, Artole, for your comprehensive opening remarks. So now I would like to move on to this the next session, which is a global trend on the renewable and its supply chain. So this session, this is a learning process for all of us. So, what is happening exactly in the renewable supply chain and what will be happening in the future. So the key topics here to focus on is, of course, the current situation and the future perspective of the renewable, and also what is the issue and challenges on the climate change and energy transition for the future. Today, we invite two excellent experts who will be focusing on their presentation on the renewable energy and jobs in the energy transition. So before I would like to give a floor to these two experts, I would like to just introduce them. So, so first, the expert is Dr. Ulrike Lea, who is the head of policy and socioeconomics unit at IRENA. And Dr. Lea analyzed the economic effects of the transition of the green economy for Germany, Russia, and Middle East, as well as climate change adaptation policies for the EU member states and particular EU regions. And she applied economics simulation models developed by Institute of Economic Structure Research and analyzed economic effect detailed by economic sector. She also focused on developing a method to identify impacts of cross-cutting sectors and technologies, such as renewable energy, e-mobility, tourism, and green production. As head of the policy division in IRENA, and she oversees IRENA's socio-economic modeling work for the world renewable energy transition outlook, as well as the socioeconomic footprint analysis. The socioeconomic analysis in IRENA regional market series and IRENA work on the gender and on jobs. And one another the expert from IRENA is Mr. Michael Lehner. He is program officer at IRENA, and he's a and his area of the work at IRENA is focused on the socio-economic impacts of renewable energy, including employment and just transition issues. He is a co-author of the report series, Renewable Energy and Jobs, Annual Review of Report on Gender Equity in the renewable energy sector, and contributor to agency's Global Renewable Outlook 2020 and its post-COVID recovery report. So welcome, Dr. Lea and Mr. Rene. So now, floor is yours.
Thank you, Khan, for the very kind introduction. And just to make sure, is the sound clear?
Yes, sound is very much clear.
Okay, great. So it will be Michael Renner who starts the presentation. And while I bring the presentation up, maybe Michael, I don't see if you have switched on your camera already, but please do so. And maybe you can just bridge this minute gap with a couple of words about the IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, which not all of our auditorium might be familiar with. Michael, I start sharing my screen.
Okay, thanks very much, Ulrike. Thanks very much, Ken, for the great introduction. So yeah, let me just say a few words about IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. We are based in Abu Dhabi with now another big office in Bonn, Germany. And the division that both Ulrike and I are part of is called KPFC, the Knowledge, Policy and Finance Center. So one of the main things that we do in KPFC is actually look at the various aspects of socioeconomics of renewable energy. So we deal with the issue of employment creation. We deal with issues of like projecting forward, modeling forward, what an energy transition pathway might mean in terms of the economy, in terms of employment, in terms of human welfare. We look at aspects, now I'm going to talk briefly about that, like the gender issue. So we try to really have a number of work streams that deal with the various aspects, sort of revolving around the issue of jobs, basically. So let me, I think Ulrike, you can just move, I think actually 2 slides, because the next one is just sort of the portion of the presentation that's mine. So I'm going to talk about the situation as it presents today, as it presents itself today. Before I talk about this report that we do on this issue, the Renewable Energy and Jobs Annual Review, I have a couple of slides. The first one is up now, that really sort of set the stage a little bit for you, right? Because most of you, I would imagine, are not very particularly familiar with the trends in the renewable energy sector. Now, as you can see in this slide, in the last roughly 10 years or so, we have seen really a lot of progress in terms of the renewable energy capacity that's being installed in the power generating sector. This is only electricity, right? But as you can see in this slide, from about 2012, 2013, 2014 on, half or more of the new capacity being installed worldwide was actually renewables, and less and less of each passing year is fossil fuels. So we are seeing a transition beginning to play out. I think I want to underline that actually, right? And the reason why I'm saying that, you will actually see in the next slide. Can we, thanks Ulrike. So first, let me direct you to the left side of the slide, right? So here, what this actually shows is not just electricity, but all renewable energy use, all renewable energy consumption from 1990 to 2018. And you can see it's definitely growing year after year. And that's, of course, very encouraging. Now, what's also really important to notice is when you look at the green line, which is the percentage of renewables in terms of total energy consumption worldwide, right? That is not nearly as encouraging. It's actually relatively flat, is increasing a little bit from year to year, but really not very much, certainly not enough in the view of IRENA. And then if you look on the right-hand side, right, this is broken down into the various end uses that are important. So the share of renewables in electricity, that's the dark orange line. That actually is where we see very encouraging developments, right? There's very steady growth year after year. And this really reflects what was on the previous slide, that we really see more and more capacity being installed. That's renewables and that is not fossil fuels. But then when we turn to other end uses, such as transport use, transport fuels, and renewables in heat, so these are the blue and the red lines, the picture is very, very different. There is really not nearly as much progress as is the case in the power sector. And that is something that needs to change, right? I mean, we are talking really year after year about the need to make much more progress in these different end uses. That is something that will ultimately really depend on much stronger, much more ambitious policies. And Ulrike at the very end of the presentation, or toward the end of the presentation, will mostly talk about the policy framework that is, in our view, very important to make all of this happen and to create the jobs that we are projecting are likely to happen over the coming years and decades. Good, so with that, let me move to the next slide, please. So most of what I will talk about is from this report, Renewable Energy and Jobs. This is the annual review 2020, which we just released in October. And so this slide gives you just a bit of a nutshell of what is actually in that report. We have this is the 8th edition actually of this report, I should say. So in each of the editions, what we usually do is we have the main findings of our work. And so we look at the individual renewable energy technologies, that's one part. And then we look at selected countries, both major ones that we cover in every edition. So these are countries like China, the US, Brazil, India, the members of the European Union. And we look at other selected countries that are really noteworthy, either in the most recent year or over a number of years. Now, what we did in this particular edition was we actually brought in some material from another report, which is actually one that Ulrike will talk about in detail later, the employment outlook for the energy transition to the year 2050. I'm not going to cover that because otherwise I would duplicate what Ulrike will tell you then later on. Another chapter is the skills needs for the energy transition. And there we draw on a series of reports that we put out, which are called leveraging local capacity, leveraging local capacities. And in those reports, we basically look at the needed materials and the needed labor inputs for typical sized wind plants and solar plants. And so I will talk a little bit about some of those findings. And then the final chapter in the report is the jobs agenda for HS transition. So I will talk about that later on as well. Let me just highlight that in the entire report, we repeatedly pick up on a number of key aspects, which are gender, job quality, and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Now, before going into the findings, let me just mention a few factors that really have a really great influence on employment creation in renewable energy. On the very top, you can see technology advances and as a result, falling costs. And of course, you can imagine as renewable energy is getting cheaper, and that is very much true, particularly for solar PV and for wind, the renewable energy becomes much more competitive with fossil fuels. So it is much more easy to say, let's actually install renewables and not fossil fuels. Let's not install more coal and let's not install more oil and gas. So with this rising competitiveness, with lower costs, it becomes possible to have rising deployment. And as you have rising deployment, you will see that in parts of the value chain that relate to manufacturing of equipment, construction and installation, you will get more and more jobs. As more and more capacities are being installed over time, you will have more jobs in operations and maintenance, right? So this is the second little part of that pie chart. Now, what we find is when we compare renewable energy and fossil fuels, for each dollar spent, you can probably create up to 3 times as many jobs in renewables as in fossil fuels. In part, that is due to the fact that renewable energy technologies are still very young, not always very mature yet. And that will change over time, of course. So as there will be growing automation, as there will be lessons learned, as there will be growing scales of deploying renewables, that ratio, of course, will look a little less favorable over time. But it's something that has not really played out all that much yet. That's, I think, something that we will see over the years and over the decades. Now, this is the bottom part of the pie, supply chain structures. How much any given country is able to create jobs in renewable energy locally, right, on its own territory, depends very, very much on its own economic structures, its own economic capabilities. And so there is this issue of supply chain structures that are, either strong or perhaps not so strong in a given country. There are issues that need to be looked at in terms of what dependencies does a country have, in terms of commodities, in terms of technology. What is their geographic footprint, basically? And to what extent are there really active efforts being made to localize the capacities that you need to actually really employ and deploy renewable energy? So it very much depends basically on national policy making, what happens. And with regard to policy, we at IRENA, we emphasize very strongly that we feel that there is much more need for policy ambition, right? We see some of the policy ambition play out in the context of the Paris Climate Agreement. There are the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, but many of those are really not nearly ambitious enough. We need to have far more progress really in both the short term and in the long term. So I'm not going to go into the details here, but Ulrich is going to talk about this later on. There are various kinds of policies directly relating to renewables, so-called deployment policies, integrating and enabling policies, but we also need to think about industrial policies. We need to very actively think about skills training, labor market measures, gender policies, and others. Now, I mentioned before that our report looks at the impacts of COVID-19. And one of the, well, if I can call it happy findings that we had is that by and large, renewable energy did far better than fossil fuels under the impact of the pandemic. Now, that's an overall, that's a very broad finding, right? Again, you need to look at each technology, you need to look at each country, and when we do that, we actually see some variation in terms of the impacts. There's both good and bad experiences that we have actually seen over the last year and a half or so. So with that, let's move to the next slide, please.
Sorry. Ah, there it is.
Okay, good. So now we get to some of the main findings of the report. And as you can see, so in 2020, the most recent year that we looked at this, we found that worldwide, there are about 12 million direct and indirect jobs in renewable energy. Now, when I say direct and indirect, that is true for most of what we cover here. For hydropower, because of different methodologies, we are actually only able to include direct jobs. So the complete number, if you will, is probably somewhat higher than 12 million. It could be 13, 14 million. It's a little hard to say. All in all, we actually try to be relatively conservative in our assumptions because we don't want to oversell what is actually going on in the world. We don't want to predict, or we don't want to show a picture that actually is overly optimistic. So we think it's better to be somewhat on the cautious side in terms of what we actually get across in our reports. But what you can see here, I think the main point really is that over the entire series of years that we have looked at from 2012, the employment worldwide in renewables actually has increased year after year after year. The most dynamic sector is actually going to be shown in the next slide more clearly. And actually, let's move to that one, might as well. So this next slide will show you a bit more of a breakdown for the year 2020 specifically. And you can see very, very clearly here that the solar photovoltaic industry is by far the leading one in terms of the number of jobs that it has generated to date, being followed by liquid biofuels, by hydropower. And hydropower, of course, would be higher in the ranks if we had both direct and indirect jobs included. Then wind energy and other important ones are also solar heating and cooling and solid biomass. The others, you see them listed below, are less important, but they will presumably also grow to some extent in coming years and coming decades. Just before I move to the next slide.
Excuse me, Michael, can you interpret this asking if you can slow down and speak a bit slower? Sorry, thank you.
Sorry, I'm being a bit fast, yeah. Apologies.
Thank you.
So let me just say one thing. So you may wonder, so where do we get these numbers from, right? So we look at a very broad array of reports that we can find worldwide. So we look at reports from governments, we look at reports from industry associations, we look very broadly at what NGOs do, what various academic experts do. And to some extent, we actually make our own calculations as well. And what we do mostly is we use so-called employment factors, where we try to figure out how many jobs do you need for each megawatt of capacity that's being installed in a given technology. As you can imagine, that varies quite a bit from country to country. So we don't have a perfect picture in this regard, right? There are, I mean, I want to be very honest about this. There are many, many gaps still that we're trying to fill, and each edition of this report that we do annually is actually trying to close those gaps. So we basically try to be very much in touch with experts around the world to improve our own knowledge of what is known and what is knowable about the employment situation in renewable energy. Good, so now let's move forward to the next slide, please. So here's a different way of showing this information, broken down by geography. And so you can see here we're showing the main, what are the leading countries. Now these are the US, Brazil, members of the EU, India, and China. In a way that is not really very surprising, right? Because these countries are some of the main manufacturers of the equipment that is needed for wind and solar facilities and others. They are also very major installation markets. And of course, when you think about how much of the human population on Earth that they represent these countries, they are really, I think about half of humanity is found in those countries. So, excuse me, not very surprising that these countries really emerge as the most visible ones. On the right-hand side of this slide, I have copied in some graphs that relate to solar photovoltaics, to wind, and to biofuels. And basically there, I just want to point out, I mean, there's a similar picture that's true in those fields, in those industries as well. For example, in solar PV, it is probably not surprising to anyone that China is by far the leading country, accounting for almost 60% actually of the jobs that we find worldwide in this industry. And that is again because China really is by far the dominant producer of solar panels. It's somewhat similar, but not as pronounced in the wind sector, where China also plays a major role. But there are other countries like the United States, some of the European countries like Germany and Spain. India also plays a role. And you will see in biofuels there, it's interesting because the picture is a little bit different, right? The biggest country there is Brazil. And what you will see is that countries like Brazil will have a much bigger employment in the supply line, basically in the agricultural sector, to produce the inputs that are needed for biofuels generation. The agricultural sectors of countries like Brazil, or for example in Southeast Asia, are not nearly as industrialized and automated as they are, for example, in the United States, which is actually the leading producer of biofuels, or for example in Europe. So there's a very different picture that emerges in the biofuel sector compared with wind and solar. Let's move to the next slide, please. So I think what I've said so far indicates that there is some measure of progress that we can actually see. There is definitely growing employment worldwide, even though a small number of countries are very dominant in employment creation. We do see that in virtually every country on Earth now, there is more and more job creation year after year after year. So we are really getting to be on the right path, I want to say. But that said, there is still a lot that needs to be done. And I think one of the main issues that I would like to highlight is being shown in this slide here, and that relates to gender. So we have a still small series of reports that deal specifically with the gender dimension. There is one that we did for the entire renewable energy sector about 2 years ago. And you can see the cover actually in the middle on the top, where we found that the average share of women in the renewable energy workforce worldwide is about 32%, right? So this is this green line that you can see in the figure on the left-hand side. Now that's better on average than women's share in oil and gas, which is about 22%. So that's good news as such. But then we did a report specifically on the wind energy sector, and there we had very different findings. There, the women's share in the workforce is only 21%. That's basically the same as in the oil and gas sector. And I think it indicates that there really remains to be a lot of work to be done. Now, let me also just say a few words about the breakdown that's being shown, right? So the big bars, the orange, red, and sort of purple bars, these really indicate within the renewable energy workforce what the share of women is in administrative positions, in the STEM professions, so in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and then also in non-STEM professions, you know, such as in legal profession, in procurement, and so on. And you can see that women fare far better in administrative jobs than in the other categories. The same is true, and it's even worse in the wind sector. So there really is, again, let me say this once more, there is really a lot of work to be done in terms of overcoming the barriers that women clearly face in this industry, which relate to a whole range of circumstances and conditions. I mean, I think there's the strongest ones in our studies, the strongest barriers are very strong sort of norms and perceptions that are really in place in many countries. And to overcome those, of course, is very, very difficult. But they are much more pragmatic issues as well. You know, if companies can make it possible to make the workplace more flexible, more welcoming for women, because women, as we all know, not only have duties in their jobs, but also duties at home as caretakers of families. So there's a need really to be more, you know, recognizing better the difficulties that women can face really on a day-to-day basis. I'm not going to go into the details, but on the right-hand side, you can see a graphic that indicates a little bit some of the policy measures or some of the means by which we think we can improve that situation. So there's a need to really mainstream gender perspectives to make people aware really of what the situation is, what the obstacles are. There is a need for better networks and for supporting mentorships for women. Often they don't have access to education and training as much as men do. We think that probably by adopting certain targets and quotas in either the workplace or if governments undertake this, that can help. But as I said before, you know, the workplace itself really needs to become much more welcoming to women, in the, you know, whether that be in an office or in a factory. And I think overall, and this is something that's good not only for women but also for men, there really is a need to very, very much look at the work-life balance. So these just in a nutshell, really a few of the areas that we feel are really important to look at in terms of trying to improve the situation with regard to the gender balance. Next slide, please. Thanks, Ulrike. So one of the things that we look at are the sort of skills and occupational patterns in renewable energy. And we have done a few reports that look at and you can see this on the left-hand side, some of the results. We have done this for solar photovoltaics. We've done this for onshore wind, for offshore wind, and for solar water heaters. And what we find in our work is that renewable energy offers employment opportunities for a really broad range of different occupations and different skills and sort of the different kinds of experiences that people have in their work lives. There is clearly a need for people who have higher education. I've mentioned this before, the STEM fields, and also non-technical qualifications. But what we find is that most of the jobs really in all of these industries, you do not really need people with university degrees. You really need much more, you know, practical problem-solving abilities. You need manual dexterity. You need sort of the ability sort of to think on your feet, as it were. And it's quite clear that in addition to university courses, in those circumstances, what's really more important is things like vocational training, apprenticeships, and also on-the-job training. So just want to make sort of a broad point to say that, you know, renewable energy, as we see it develop so far, really offers many opportunities for different people from different kinds of backgrounds. Next slide, please. Good, and I think this is my final slide actually. So we more and more are actually emphasizing that, you know, when we look at employment creation in renewable energy, it's not just a matter of the numbers. I mean, the numbers may be impressive, right? 12 million jobs sounds like a lot. But of course, it's really important to look at what kinds of jobs. Are these good jobs? Are these jobs that pay really good wages, that are safe for the workers to carry out? Is there the right to organize? Are there other labor rights that are being observed? And so we find that these kinds of outcomes or these kinds of results really depend on a range of factors. So including the occupational and skills patterns in the different industries, right? Because the more that you have the kinds of jobs that tend to pay well, the more that will also be reflected in renewable energy. But then there is also the geographic footprint of renewable energy. And excuse me, sorry, just one moment. And so when we look at what happens around the world in different countries, we know, of course, that prevailing wages are very different from country to country. Conditions in different countries are very different. There may not be the same degree, or there may not be any unionization at all. There may not be any enforcement or weak enforcement of labor standards only. There may or may not be collective bargaining arrangements in place. And I've just very briefly indicated this on the right-hand side. To quite an extent, this of course depends on the attitude of the companies in the field. And we see sort of a very rough distinction. This is not a complete black and white situation, but we see a rough distinction between some of the older line companies that have been already operating for years and years and years, or decades as it may be, and that may now actually more and more getting themselves into the renewable energy sector. They may be more likely to actually have experience in terms of working with unions, in terms of working with their workers, in terms of having collective bargaining arrangements in place. But we find that a large number of the newer companies, the startup companies that are quite prevalent in the renewable energy sector, there is a different kind of culture. There is a more skeptical approach or more skeptical attitude toward unions. Or there is often when one sort of hears people say, we don't think we need unions, right? So I think there's a need to really have much more engagement in that sense. And so, I mean, this is obviously the field where you know far more than I do, but I did want to bring this up as a very broad point. And I think at this point, I'm just happy to hand this over to Ulrike for her remarks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks a lot. And apologies for being slow with moving the slides, but sometimes it clicks and sometimes it doesn't, just like now. Okay. My role in this presentation is to take you to the future, because as Atle has said in his introductory words, there are already projections existing how many jobs we will be having in the renewable energy field, or in the energy transition, as we call it, field overall. And that is, of course, for your strategies and for defining your union's way to the future. That's very important. I mean, how many people in which economic sectors, in which parts of the economy are we actually looking at? Now, to be able to understand that and to be able to estimate that, we have to make use of scenarios. We do not have a glass ball where we can just predict the future, but we have to look at the scenarios and look at what we call a what-if analysis. So what if the world, for instance, adheres to a 1.5 degree compatible future pathway in energy and in all the end-use sectors, of course, in all the energy intensive industries, in electricity generation, in, as Michael said, heating and cooling and so on. Several scenarios and emission pathways exist. On this slide, on the left side, you see just an example from a publication that I came across, a very recent publication, where colleagues have gathered a lot of scenarios, and all the red scenarios, and in particular the blue scenarios, are likely pathways towards a 1.5-degree compatible future without any overshooting of the, because what global warming is doing, we can already observe that now, and I guess we all agree in this room or in this webinar that we don't need much more of it. All scenarios will involve renewable energy. They will also involve efficiency, and they all focus strongly on electrification. And we at IRENA have been developing one of the scenarios that we call the energy transition towards 1.5C. And it is published in our World Energy Transition Outlook, which has been launched this summer. And the results that I'm sharing with you are taken from that outlook. You'll find that on our webpage. The pathway towards net zero, of course, includes phasing out of fossil fuels. Otherwise, we do not get net zero carbon emissions. What we foresee in our pathway is a more or less rapid phase out of coal power and expansion of renewable power by 2030. And then a lot of things will need to happen. So renewable energy power addition rate need to triple. Of course, they have to be matched with the energy system. For that, and also for the power addition rates, we need sufficient carbon pricing. We need a rapid decline in the fossil fuel driven cars, a ramp up in clean hydrogen production, CCS in industry, in the hard to abate, as we call them, sectors, and building efficiency renovation rate in the global north, where heating is an issue, but also in the global south, where cooling is an issue. Governments then need to accelerate grid and hydrogen infrastructure investments. In the next 2 decades following that, we will then pick up even more electrification in the vehicle. Biomass will reach a larger share of final consumption. As I said, cars and trucks are mostly electrified. Heat pumps start playing a larger and larger, a crucial role in space heating, and electrification and renewables drive the efficiency gains. Here we compare where we are today, or in 2018, which was the last year where we had a comprehensive data set for, and where we need to be in 2050. You see in 2018, our total final energy consumption was pretty much dominated by fossil fuels. Of course, there's already, as Michael showed, there's already renewables, in particular in electricity, but in overall, not so much. Now, where we need to be, given that, as I said, we do not really want to have global warming exceed 1.5 or 2 degrees, by 2050, electricity would be the main energy carrier with more than 50% direct share of total final energy consumption. Also, by 2050, 90% of total electricity needs would be supplied by renewables. And another 8% of final energy would come as indirect electricity in the form of hydrogen. Now, that definitely doesn't come without money. I mean, that comes at a price, and it really needs investment. It really needs money to be spent on this. And what we do, and what also all other serious studies on the energy transition do, is we do compare a pathway that already has been decided and, as we know, is not sufficient, which is the planned energy scenario you see in this picture, to a scenario that is 1.5 degree compatible. And that is where we need to be. Any scenario development, any analysis of the effects of an energy transition scenario needs to do that. It needs to compare the future pathway to a reference scenario to actually be able to say by how much the future scenario is better, is improving, and what are the economic effects. So under the planned energy scenario, which is, for instance, coined by the NDCs that Michael has been mentioning, the world already spends 3.3 trillion US dollar per year on this energy transition. And the challenge is to crank that up by 1.1 trillion US dollar. You see, I even have a hard time saying trillion. That's such a lot of money to actually be where we need to be. So the future climate safe future calls for the scale up and needs to accelerate the pace of the energy transition and scale up investment. But globally, there will be more employment from that. Now, what does more mean? The overall economic effect is positive, as this slide says on the right side, and more is determined by comparing the 1.5C scenario with said reference. So that's what I already mentioned in IRENA's analysis. The reference contains all NDC pledges and all energy current energy plans, but obviously it does not suffice. And here you see then that spending that additional money and adhering to the energy transition leads to 1.5% more employment globally. So there is actually a plus of employment in all sector economy-wide. And that comes from energy transition related investment. It also comes, for instance, from trade, because several countries, well, because trade then acts as a negative, as you see here, because the oil exporting countries, of course, and the jobs in the oil exporting industries are being lost or need to be shifted. And this is why this analysis is so important, because it really gives you an honest view on the future development. It doesn't only say, oh, we are the greatest in renewable energy, but it does give you an honest view where jobs are expected to be gained and where jobs are expected to be lost. And to give you even a more fine-tuned picture, here we have the breakdown of the jobs losses and gains by economic sector. And you see, and this is also what Michael has been referring to earlier, you see, for instance, the bioenergy will be playing a more important, increasingly important role, and it is very labor intensive. You see also, and this is about honesty, that coal and oil, gas and manufacturing fuels will employ less people under this energy transition. But you see there is a large contribution of basic manufacturing, of engineering and transport equipment, electricity supply. Those are the sectors that are really gaining. And then, of course, all the services, the business services, the public and personal services are also gaining from the energy transition. Now, is this going to happen by itself? I doubt it. It does need a supporting policy framework. In renewable energy, the transformed energy sector, the total transformed energy sector, so not only renewables, but also energy efficiency, also the grids, and also hydrogen, will have 122 million jobs in 2050. By segment then, we are looking at fuel supply with decreasing importance. We are looking at manufacturing and constructing with over time increasing importance, and then at the end of the decades, operation and maintenance really is a increasingly important sector. And that is, of course, the source of permanent jobs. That is the source of, over the lifetime in the installation, a permanent accompanying employment. Now, in renewable energy itself, renewable energy jobs will increase to 43 million in 2050. So it's a bit more than Atle has been saying in his introducing words. I think I don't think IRENA is overly optimistic here. I think we have a very, very deep and detailed and data-based knowledge about renewable energy jobs. So what we are actually looking at is 43 million in 2050. Now that is additional to the 12 million. No, that includes the 12 million we already have today. So that would be an additional 31 million by 2050. And as Michael said, I mean, the structure of the occupations that we are looking at here will be, the occupational pattern will comprise a large share of workers and technicians skilled along the pathways that Michael has shared already with you. And then we have some STEM and engineering experts, higher degree, university degree expert, and some marketing and administrative personnel. And as I said, this does not come by itself. It's not going to happen by itself. And also the transition is not going to be successful by itself, because on the way there, you see there's a lot of potential labor market misalignments. So one is, of course, temporal. You lose the job and not at the same time you immediately have another job at the same spot, basically. One more important is spatial. So new jobs, new opportunities, not necessarily are created in the same locations. Communities, regions, countries can experience losses, and other communities, regions, and countries experience gains. And this is important for you to reorient or to orient the union's work there. Then, of course, it will also be a sectoral, or can also be a sectoral misalignment. So job gains and losses affect different sectors. But increasingly, research shows that the type of skills in the fossil fuel sectors and in the, let's say, old energy system sectors are needed for the transition and are needed for future jobs. However, a lot of policy and a lot of regulatory work and a lot of influence also is necessary to, for instance, align certifications, to align qualifications, to have certificates and skills from one sector accepted in the other. Which brings me to the last point. There can be educational and skill mismatch, which then needs to be bridged, and bridged timely to facilitate the move between sectors, or also facilitate youth to just jump on board for the energy transition. Now, this brings me to my last slide. We can only do this, or the energy transition needs help. It obviously needs money, but it also needs a comprehensive policy framework for it to be a just energy transition. And there are so many things to be addressed. And I think we are going to share the slides at the end of this webinar. So maybe you want to come back to this slide, because it is very complex and has a lot of points that need to be addressed. Let me just take out a few of them. Absolutely, to ensure decent jobs is absolutely part and parcel of an energy transition that is also accepted by the people. And that is a point I really want to stress. We need everybody on board. Otherwise, if we do not have the energy transition being accepted, and that is true for developing countries and the industrial world. It's pretty much true for any country. I don't know if you realize that I'm German, but in Germany there is a lot of opposition also going on towards renewable energy. So you really need to increase and enhance acceptance and take everybody with you. Of course, Michael already shared a lot regarding gender, minorities, marginalized groups, and overall the workforce diversity, which of course needs to be brought forward also under the energy transition. I think for the unions, it's important to look at the potential job misalignments, but I leave that for Diana to then share with you. The structural barriers are on the in line with industrial policies. So to strengthen supply chains and supply chain limits, and to move from the existing structures and take the best from the existing structures to the energy future is an absolute must that needs to be supported by the respective policies. I think I already talked too long and leave it at that, and would then, I think, give the floor to Diana, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before we go into Diana, I would like to thank you very much for this very comprehensive and informative presentation, including all the aspects, all the important aspects we would like to know. I think those presentation and information will definitely contribute, our future strategy, especially on the just transition, because we organize workers in the both sector, which is renewable supply chain, but on the other hand, fossil fuel traditional energy sector also. So this is very important, information that we need to know, and we would like to utilize those information for our future strategy, especially on the just transition. So before we goes to Diana's presentation, I would like to open the floor for the question and answer. I see one more hand raised, but before we go to this question, I would like to first give a floor to the Diana for her presentation. Then if we have time, then I will come back to your question, Brother Ahmed. So please understand the time situation. So now I would like to invite my colleague Diana, Energy Director for IndustriALL Global Union, who actually recently participated also at COP26 in Glasgow. As a delegate of a labor union. So she will present issues and challenges we are facing right now on the climate change and energy transition. So now floor is yours, Diana.
Thank you very much, Ken. Yeah, don't worry, my presentation will be short, so for sure we will have more time for questions and debate after that. So I'm going to share my screen with a few slides that I have. I guess that you can see it right now. It's okay. Okay, full screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so yeah, we have been listening about why the renewable sector is growing so much and why this is needed, and it's because the impact of climate change. You know that this impact it's affecting not only communities and people, it's also affecting us as workers and our sectors. So because of that is that we need to be part of all this change and be aware of how we can take part and decide in all this. We have been listening the experts of IRENA talking about the need of this transformation, and what it's clear is that we will need a transformation in the entire sectors, in the industries, but also in the workforce, and this is going to imply the transformation as well of our unions and the way that we work on the different sectors, and this is also going to bring new technologies that we will need to adapt, new skills, new players in the equation that we will need to work with, and also different countries. We saw at the beginning of the presentation that Michael was sharing with the key countries where all these renewable energies are growing the most, and how the employment is going to be in the future. So we need to be part of this. And in order to cooperate on this and to participate, we IndustriALL, we took part of the climate conference in Glasgow, the COP26 that took place 1 month ago. And we as a trade unions, with a group of the other trade unions, we had 4 very clear demands. And these clear demands were those that you have here in the screen. And the first one was to raise climate ambition with a very clear just transition policies and measures in order to enhance the national determined contributions. It was a big debate, the definition of just transition, because now everyone is talking about just transition, but in different terms. And for us, what just transition means, there is no other conception. For us, what it means is that workers are at the table and are part of these negotiations, are part of the transition that it's happening, and they are consulted and they are able to decide the future that they want. So it took us some time in order to raise our voices and make everyone to understand that this is the definition that we understand for this just transition. And it was something important that happened, that it was that the Glasgow Climate Pact explicitly recognizes in the document that there is a need for support towards a just transition on this transformation. So it's important that the terms of just transition appears reflected properly in these documents that came out from Glasgow. And in the presentations that we have seen before, they also talk about the national determined contributions, and for everyone to know that these contributions are the key part of the Paris Agreement. And these contributions are the plans that the countries have to present. Is like they have to say how they are going to reduce the emissions and how they are going to adapt the impact to the impact of this climate change in their countries. No. So for you to have an idea, the COP, this conference is made by 197 countries, and only of 197 out of them, 110 have presented their national determined contributions. We could say that is a little bit more than 50%. But the thing is that of these 110 that have presented their plans, only 49 are mentioning the just transition on their plans. And this is really worrying because they are not even thinking about this. They are just saying how they are going to make the transition, but without taking into account the workers' part. And that is, it's really dangerous. So this is something that we have to understand, what is our role as unions and at national level, that Ulrich already mentioned, that we have to work with our governments to lobby them and to make them part of this in order to work together with them to achieve this just transition. The second point that we were raising was implement the inclusive climate policies to respect and promote human and labor rights. And this was also something that it was a little bit worrying when we were there, because we noticed that there was a worrying trend in order to pick and choose human rights where labor rights were often left out. They didn't include the labor rights as much as we were expecting. There was also the provide the climate finance to change the global development model and decarbonize the global south. And this was also an important part that took place regarding the loss and damage, the financial part of the agreement, in order to support the countries that are feeling already the impact of this climate change, and how to support them and how to help them in this decarbonization. And this was one of the biggest failures that we can say of this COP, because the countries didn't even manage to agree on to creating a permanent group or a permanent workshop in order to discuss this. So it was a little bit disappointing. And the fourth one is about implementing these strong and industrial policies and investment plans underpinning the transition to the net zero emissions and economies. And this is something that, as Ulrich has been mentioning before, we really need to have the industrial policies clear ones in order to know how we can move forward and how we can proceed. But these were the demands that we have, and one of the main outcomes that we face during the COP, one of the most important ones, was the approval or the adoption of a declaration, that is this one that you can see on the left, about supporting the conditions for a just transition internationally. So this declaration was presented by the UK government, and it was also supported by 14 different countries and the European Commission as well. So what they are trying to get with this declaration is to support. It was these governments that approve it. They are supporting this just transition through the green growth, decent work, and economy prosperity as economies are moving to the net zero emissions. And one of the main examples that we could see took also place during COP, and it was the adoption of this declaration on the energy transition for South Africa. This declaration was also approved by the countries that you can see there, from France, Germany, United States of America, the UK, and the European Union, in order to put together a big amount of money, that is $8.5 billion, in order to support the decarbonization of South Africa, in order to process all this plan and give them resources to do it. So this is one of the first examples that we can see, and how this is working. So for us, this was a big, it's something really good, that if really happens, and if it's a success, it can be a very good example for other countries as well. And as I'm going to, this is the last slide, I took from our colleagues from IRENA this part where Ulrich at the end was mentioning all the challenges. I'm not going to repeat them, but two key things for us are in all the misalignments that will exist about the space, about the sectors, the timing where all these changes are coming, and the occupations. I think that this is also our job, to be there, to be prepared, and to demand with enough anticipation what is coming and what is going to happen. Because with all this, what we want is to bring information for you to be prepared in order to demand this transition. Something very important as well, and one of our main challenges, is the supply chain. And this is also the main reason why we are here organizing this webinar, in order to to support our affiliates in the entire supply chain of the renewable energies. And now you can see how the supply chain is wider and wider, and we need to be part of all the entire supply chain and support all our affiliates from the beginning until the end. And of course, this cannot be happen if we cannot ensure decent jobs, because all this transformation to the green energies and green jobs, that Matthias will talk later about that, are not possible if these new jobs are not decent jobs. And decent means with proper salaries and wages, with properly health and safety conditions, but also labor rights and the labor to collective bargaining and to defend yourself properly. So these are the main challenges that we are going to face. But I also would like to put here the solutions, because we also have to be positive and thinking about the future and what we can do. But it has already been mentioned. We are not going to bring here any key solution. All these solutions has to be done with a holistic approach, and in order to make these policies and how to focus not only in energy sector itself, we also need to build a more creative or sophisticated understanding in order to close all these interconnections between the economy, the energy sector, and the social part of all of this. We need to know and we need to understand how the renewable energy policies that are linked to this structural change, and how the assurance of a just transition can be part of all of that. So by my side is finished, and now we prepare some questions for the part of questions and answers and for the debate, but not only for now, for just after me, but also for your for the entire webinar. There are some questions that we would like you to think about and to respond. You can ask for the floor during the entire webinar. You can also raise questions in the chat, and are all of these because we are organizing this because we really want to know what is the level of knowledge that you have about the renewable energies in your countries, what is happening, if your countries are investing or not, if you are involved on these new sectors, if you are part of that, if your unions are representing workers in the sectors of renewable energies, or in the companies that are investing on this. But also, well, we want to know what are the main challenges for you in order to work for this energy transition. So yeah, you can think about these questions and you can maybe respond right now or maybe later. So that is all. Thank you very much, Can.
Yes, thank you very much, Diana, for your good presentation. I think you well illustrated our challenges that we are facing. And also thank you very much for your report on the COP26 that we have demanded. So now, for your information, I think Dr. Lea has commented regarding the So let's move on to next section, so which is increase our union power in the supply chain of renewable. So in this section, we will focus on developing trade union network, so which is case study of the green tech, which is responsible by my colleague Matthias Hartwig. And also we will focusing on how we will develop strategy to increase union power in the renewable supply chain. And we will also try to promote our policy tools on the supply chain of renewable. And we will also think about the possibility on the next steps toward developing strategy and creating reunion network around the supply chain of renewable. So first, I would like to give floor to Brother Matthias for his presentation, focusing on this case study of the green tech experience. So floor is yours, Matthias.
Thank you very much, Kan. Can you see my screen now with the green tree?
Yes, beautifully I see the screen.
Yes, this is artwork. And well, when I followed the discussion, it came to my mind that we often as trade unionists have the tendency to see the negative impact and to be afraid of the future, but there's no remembered a quote that was actually said Dr. Martin Luther would have said, but today we assume it was rather a German lecturer during the Second World War. So in the darkest hours of my country of origin, somebody said, if I knew that the world went under tomorrow, I would still plant an apple tree today, because I would like to, well, climate change, the fear of job losses, world is heating up, and COVID is putting us under pressure. But we as trade unionists, we should not create despair, but hope, and we should develop a perspective. And to be honest, that was also one of the reasons why we started the work on green technologies within IndustriALL Global Union in, I would call it my sector. I know I don't own a sector, but my sector co-chairs in the mechanical engineering gave us clear orders. Well, we should take a positive take. We should embrace the changes that are coming. And here is a slide that shows you two of the mega trends that we identified as being the most important trends of today. And the one is on the left-hand side, and the graphic is taken from a lesson I've learned from the Fraunhofer Institute of Austria, the definition of Industry 4.0 and digitalization, and that's affecting all of our sectors, actually. And the other one is green technologies. And green technologies, this is not defined here because I would say it's still a liquid wording. It's a definition in progress, although we are working already with it, but we are referring to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And if you look into these 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, what you see is that our industries are core to achieve these goals, because without industrial production, there is no trade, no exchange, no wealth. And what we need is, we want to fight poverty, we want to fight hunger. And to this end, we need an industry that is fostering innovation and infrastructure, but at the same time offering decent working economic growth. Here within this energy setting, the affordable and clean energy, and I would even add the access to electricity, might be something of a question of democracy for the future. And that goes beyond what we do in mechanical engineering, but that's where we started. And we started in late 2018, and Diana and Kan will remember, was a small group that came together in Gothenburg in Sweden to discuss what are the challenges and what are our trade union responses, and can we somehow refer to the also rather the opportunities than only the challenges. So that was the starting point from where we took it. And let me start with a question: what is the difference of green technology compared to traditional technology? I don't want to go back to all the Industry 4.0 discussion, but one of the core issues is, and you see it here on the left-hand side, that we would say green technology means to produce and to service from cradle to cradle instead from cradle to trash. So throughout the 20th century, what we did was we took natural resources, may it be biological nutrients like food, or technical nutrients like coal, fossil fuels, or also iron ore, etc. We took them, we produced something, we consumed it, and then we dumped it. This is not the future, because I will come back to this in a moment. So the future of industrial production and services is that we take it, we make something out of it, and we consume and we use it, but we try to lose as little as possible, and we regenerate and we recapture the value within this process. And in the industrial processes, we restore, we repair, we reuse, refurbish, re-engineer, and recycle. That is also something where green technology, and that's where we started, delivers for the energy change. That's, you know, the generators. If we start with the rotating equipment, if we go to the generators, if we go to the grids, if we go to the gearboxes, etc., all this is delivering green energy, but it's going also, on the one hand, green tech and mechanical engineering is smaller than the energy chains, because we are in the supply chain delivering the technology so that energy can be generated and distributed in a smarter and a green way. But also, on the other hand, it's bigger insofar as mechanical engineering also delivers the technology and the equipment for industrial production to be more sustainable, to be more green. And insofar, only part of our jobs are reflected in the IRENA statistics. So it's a little bit, we are in between, and insofar I think it's quite a good showcase to what might be the future of industrial production and services. I added on the right-hand side on this slide a picture that I took from Kate Raworth, and this is what she calls the donut economics, because core issue is that we don't have a second planet Earth in hand. If we destroy this planet, and we have discussed today a lot about climate and heating up, if we destroy this planet, there is no second planet at hand, and our children and grandchildren have no place to live. So the first ceiling that we have, the outer boundary, is our planet and its resources. We cannot use and consume more than this planet can deliver on the long term. But then we have also the inner boundaries, and that's exactly where we as trade unions have to take care. And many of you raised already the social foundation, food and water for everybody, and income with which you can food yourself and your family, education, vocational training, giving a job, access to electricity. These are the core demands that we have to fulfill. And living, you could call this the green circle there, might be the, let's call it comfort zone. So respecting the outer boundaries, at the same time providing for the social needs of human beings, workers and their families. This is the way forward. And that's where green technology in mechanical engineering can contribute in order to make this happen and in order to get people on board. Because on the one hand, well, as mentioned, we have not a second planet at hand, so we have to live with what is there. And on the other hand, we need to provide for proper living and working conditions so that people can accept the changes and embrace them. And we identified in mechanical engineering, and we have done, and I want to mention it here because this part of the research was also co-funded and supported by FES, Friedrich Ebert Foundation from Germany, because also FES saw the same kind of strategic need for repositioning us as trade unions in this process. And we have identified 4 areas where mechanical engineering is contributing. And the first one is energy efficiency, because if you go back to this slide here, the question of technical nutrients and biological nutrients. So restore, repair, reuse, and only consume as much as you can generate in the same time. That is one of the issues where energy efficiency is core. The second, and that's the same, the kind of, you could call it the circular economy, if you wish, the raw material and material efficiency. So the German word for sustainability actually comes from the forestry. In the 18th century already in Bavaria, the legislation said you may not cut down more trees than you can harvest, than can regrow in the same time. In other words, if you look into some areas of Europe where they build huge naval fleets with wood, there is no forest today, but in Bavaria, this is the biggest wood owner all over Central Europe. So use the raw material in a way that you don't consume more and can be regenerated at the same time. The third is sustainable mobility. And although what you see here is an electric vehicle, it's going beyond, because electric vehicles is just one pathway. Then we have other means of future mobility that might be public transportation, that might be better railways, that might be other forms of transportation. But all in all, the question of sustainable mobility, a mobility that harms the environment less than today, and that it keeps us mobile. Just to give you an example, I'm coming from a country where you have 48 million combustible cars today. Just replacing them with 48 million electric vehicles will not keep us mobile. We will maybe all be in the traffic jam and we don't pollute the environment, but at the same time, we are not mobile, but we are standing in the traffic jam. So the mobility, the sustainability of mobility has to be redefined, but here also mechanical engineering delivers the technology to enable other industries, may it be the automotive industry, may it be the train industry, etc., to deliver and to contribute to these goals. And then we have the environmentally friendly generation, storage, and distribution of energy. And that's today's major topic, but within the mechanical engineering, it's one of the topics. I just wanted to showcase that we are a little bit working hand in hand here, also cross over with the sectors. You know, we are working with the ICT electronics, we are working with energy, and we are working with mechanical engineering, because all these sectors come together when it comes to the future of work and the future of industrial employment. And one of the core decisions my sector leadership made quite early, more or less after the 2018 event already, was that we said, we want to pilot the change. We want to be leading the change. In other words, we embrace the new technologies instead of being afraid and trying to avoid them. That sounded a bit weird to some of our affiliates at that time, because it was a little bit like, yes, but this change, the new technology, might be a threat to workplaces. But our approach was, the work that is disappearing is, if we are strong as trade unions, we can replace these workplaces with better jobs, with cleaner jobs, and with a future of work that is contributing to a better technology and a better future. But that leads to the next question, and that's also a bit related to what the IRENA report about the job said. But one of our issues, and that's our core challenge, and that is one of also the major issues that we have to work on over the next years, is when we look into employment, we have a number of issues that we have to respect. And I would not always call it challenges, because it's an open field. New technology, the green technology, is neutral, but we have to see one thing from the beginning. No job from the beginning is a good or a union job. So if we speak about 25 or 31 million jobs that might evolve in the technology, may it be in energy and the supply chain, or in mechanical engineering altogether. And again, the exact figures are rather, looking into a crystal ball. But one of the core issues is all these jobs that are not there already, they may be bad jobs, because if we leave it to the multinational corporations to lead the change, what they always tend to do is cheap labor, labor without responsibility, and labor without trade unions. And some of the new working structures may even facilitate it for multinational corporations, because if you are working remotely if work is done from home or mobile, then you don't have the access to the workplaces as we had in the past. If you are going to a steel plant today, no, you go to the gates and in the morning you can distribute 10,000 leaflets and you have reached all workers. Today, if people are working from home or remotely or wherever, then you have to decide on how to approach them and how to reach them. So there are a number of issues that we have to take into account. The first is the number of jobs. We are about to map this out. We have heard from the IRENA study about the potential growth in the energy parts. We have also had in our research specific figures in mechanical engineering. But then it's also the question of the nature of jobs. Will it be high qualified, low qualified, vocational training? So in other words, we have to take care that we help our brothers and sisters, our trade union members, our affiliates, to help people, our workers, our future workers, to have the right qualification, to have the setting and the skills that are needed so that they are not kind of, on the one hand, your old job gets lost, but the new job is already occupied by somebody else, either cheaper or being relocated or subcontracted or whatever. So we have to keep an eye on what kind of jobs, what nature of jobs is evolving. Then the organization of work. It's really important that we know and that we monitor how the work is organized so that we as trade unions can develop adaptive strategies, how to reach out to the workforce. And I would say in principle, one of the tendencies, and we have discussed this, especially among Khan, Diana, and myself, the question of what I would like to call the white collarization of blue collar jobs. So the traditional worker might be not the same in the future. It's rather like the traditional white collar and the traditional blue collar jobs are in a way merging because, for example, even in non-academic, in non-STEM professions, you might need to be able to use a pad, an iPhone or whatever in order to communicate with your cyber physical neighbor. Then we have the terms and conditions of employment. And here that's one of the core issues, because if we say the technology is open, this means also it can be turning to the bad. So working conditions just being dictated by the employer might be far worse than what we know today. And we are losing jobs in traditionally quite strong and well-organized areas. So in other words, it's crucial that we as trade unions, together with our affiliates, be on board as soon as possible in order to make these green jobs in green technology trade union jobs, good jobs, jobs with CBA coverage, with the free access to trade unions, with works councils, shop stewards, etc., etc. And then also the working conditions. The work is changing, but health and safety is not automatically improving. We have seen during the pandemic now that in all sectors, but also in mechanical engineering, fatality rates jumped up. At the same time, stress symptoms are growing. People are suffering from high tension and from a lot of stress and pressure on their work. So we want to monitor the working conditions and be a partner for our workers. Here's my last slide. And so what did we do in the green tech arena? We set the framework and we adopted, and if you later receive the presentation, if you click down here, you see there comes a hand. So if you click down there, a document opens, and that's the so-called Green Tech Manifesto. I recommend you all to read it because it's really a good, very, very short, very concise document that puts together our demands. But our general approach is we want a sustainable industrial policy. We are fighting for a just transition. And that means we defined green tech within the mechanical engineering sector as a strategic activity. So what we are doing is we are improving the knowledge about green technology among our affiliates. As mentioned earlier, we have just had the research, we published it, and we are spreading it to the regions, to the sectors. We have been mapping challenges and opportunities for employees and trade unions in the sector. And at the same time, we promise to support organizing drives in the green tech industries, in mechanical engineering. And from our point of view, green tech and digitalization, or Industry 4.0, go hand in hand, because green technology is, let's call it, clean and digital technology. And so far, this goes hand in hand, and we have to have both of these things in our mind. We have to look out for the consequences for the jobs, for the qualification, for the future of work, and just transition. And as said, if we need less manual work, then the distribution of work and the distribution of wealth becomes more and more important, because if we can produce the same wealth in less hours, then the question is, and we produce the same wealth, then the question is who takes the wealth. And if it's going all to the multinational corporations, then we will have higher unemployment and less fairness. So it's up to us to struggle and to fight to keep the wealth distribution more even. And this is also a question of qualification and of unionizing. And in so far, recruiting, organizing in a changing working environment, that's one of the core issues. And that's why we are developing organizing tools. And my sector leadership already said we want to meet, if ever possible, in 2022, again in person. And then we want to transfer the research results plus the Green Tech Manifesto into concrete policies that we really then can offer also our regions. And the regions are also one of the core resources within IndustriALL Global Union. We are supporting the regions. We offer workshops. We offer trainings. We are developing manuals, and so far that is the key. And let me conclude this session, or my input, with a remark. For me, it is the green technology in mechanical engineering is closely linked to the energy sector and to the ICT electronics. These three sectors go hand in hand, as many multinational corporations also show. If you look into corporations like Siemens Gamesa, General Electric, and other companies that are producing installations and industrial equipment, not only in the energy sector, but also in the energy sector, this goes hand in hand. And then we have three steps, to be honest, that we always have to keep in mind. We have to kind of map the area. That's the research part. We have just finalized the research. We have to network. We have had the first network meeting on 27th of October this year. It was a virtual network meeting, unfortunately. Nothing else was possible, but we will continue, and if ever possible in 2022, we will do it also physically, and we will also do this in the regions. And we've had a very, very interesting workshop over this topic with our Indian affiliates already last week. And then we will support our affiliates, our regions who want to take action. And I think we need two things, and trade unionists, at least the tradition that I know, trade unionists have these strengths. And so far, I'm very, very confident that we can manage this change. We need passion. And I can promise you, although I'm already 35 years on board as a unionist, I still have the passion to deliver and to work with our affiliates and with our members. And we need patience, because these developments do not, it's not like you turn the key and then everybody is on board, everybody has the same knowledge, but you have to have the patience and the strength to also go through some setbacks. There's a saying in my home country, well, winning means standing up once more than you fall down. And I think we as IndustriALL Global Union and our affiliates, we have the passion and we have the patience. And so far, I'm very, very confident, and I'm open to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Matthias, for I think this is a good case study cases for so that the group of this renewable energy supply chain can learn from. Then you also mentioned about the passion and patience. Yes, of course, we are all the trade unionists. We have a passion, but we do not have so much patience for the just transition, I would say. So we need to speak up more on the just transition. But anyway, I think you mentioned about the green tech strategy activity, which this group, renewable energy, can learn from, which is improving knowledge around the renewable energy, and we need to mapping our challenges throughout this the supply chain of renewable, and most importantly, this group needs to support organizing drives in the supply chain of the renewable energy, especially supporting the unions in the developing country who are mostly affected to this energy transition and renewable energy. So before I go to my presentation, at this moment, if you have any question, comment to the Matthias presentation, you can do that now. So if that is not the case, then I will go on to my presentation. So let me share my screen. So what I'm going to present is how we can strategize our union power in this supply chain of renewable. And I would like to also introduce the policy tool that we are currently have. And I will also make some proposal for the possible next steps toward developing the strategy in this supply chain of renewable. So as you see in this screen, this is the action plan activity extracted from our industrial new action plan, which was adopted on the 14th and 15th at our third Congress in September. So this action plan will valid until the next Congress period until 2025. Then, so I would like to highlight the section where it is related to this renewable energy. So this two, the paragraph you are seeing on the screen is coming from the energy section, which is written in the Sustainable Industrial Policy in our action plan. So what it says is that one is that we need to develop progressive energy policies that fully take into account the interest of workers as they face rapid changes in the national energy policies and structures to address climate change and to adapt to new technologies that substantially change the skills and qualification required of energy workers. And the second point is that we need to support the development of a balanced energy mix through the democratic discussion in the countries concerned, and accepted that energy mix will vary greatly country by country. And we have already got a good comment from Brother Zama from India and also Brother Benjamin from Tanzania. I think this is, we need to think about how those union in those countries can make a democratic discussion in their country's energy, the balanced energy mix. So this is something that we need to strategize, and we hope we can propose some policies to the developing countries' unions. And when it comes to just transition, I found this 5 paragraph is related to our discussion around the supply chain of renewable. The first one is fight for a just transition, able to handle transformation around climate change, energy transition, digitalization, and any other change in economy, industry, and working condition. And second one is we will demand public regulation for just transition and a seat for trade unions at the table for discussion at company, local, national, regional, and global level to establish basic structures and ground rule through the social dialogue. Again, this is actually, we would like to support heavily to the unions in the developing country to make this happening. Then we need to demand the establishment of permanent institutions to ensure a just transition for all affected workers. And we would like to demand recognition of fundamental labor rights as core principle within any discussion, and ensure that strategies, policies, and measures towards the development of sustainable industrial policy and the just transition are gender responsible. So it was very useful information given by IRENA today, that they have already included how the gender equality is indicated in each segment of the renewable energy. So we also need to focus on, we need to also develop the discussion how we can achieve gender equality around the supply chain of the renewable. So now I would like to introduce our policy tool in the renewable supply chain. As you all know, that we have framework agreement and trade union network in the renewable supply chain. I actually counted in this morning how many GFA we have around renewable energy supply chain. We actually have 17 GFA with multinational companies who is related to this supply chain of renewable. We have a good framework agreement with energy company, and also we have a good global framework agreement with green tech company. So this is something that we can use in the future. And we also have these trade union networks around, which is related to this renewable supply chain. So we need to utilize this GFA and trade union network to increase our leverage to strategize, our future activities in this renewable supply chain. And we also published quite many policy papers and guidelines to support union work in the renewable supply chain. The first one is the policy paper, which called Towards Sustainable Industrial Policy, which was a discussion paper, which has been used for quite a long time. That was published in April back in 2013. So this discussion paper is kind of, it's already outdated. But recently, the last, I would say last 3-4 years, we have a series of policy paper that you can use. So one is Trade and Industrial Policy, Implication for Development and International Labor Standards, which was published in November in 2018. And we have Trade Union Guide to a Just Transition for Workers, which was published in May 2019. And as Matthias already introduced, we have this manifesto, Green Tech 2020, Engineering the Future, the Industrial Vision for Green Mechanical Engineering. This has been published in November last year. Then early this year, we have published Energy Transition Perspective and Trends, the Pattern, Scenario, and Impact on the January 2021. In this research report in Energy Transition Perspective and Trend, we actually reported that quite many new job opportunity will be created. But in the report, we also mentioning we are not sure if those created jobs are good quality job or not. So which is the big question for us. I think the earlier discussion this morning, we also, there's a comment from China about China, around China. As far as I understand, this Chinese dominance in the renewable energy is also becoming a serious problem. When the Chinese company is operating outside of China, and how we can approach to that workers in the workplaces in the multinational company operated by Chinese the company. So this is actually the big challenges. This is already happening in the battery supply chain, for example. The world's biggest battery supply battery manufacturer called CATL, which is already consists 30% of the total battery supply for electric vehicle. They are newly emerged company. They established only 10 years ago, but they are now the biggest battery manufacturer in the world. And they are now investing outside of China. So we have to be ready for that, that how we can organize, how we can reach out those unorganized workers who are working in the Chinese company. And in the quite recent research, we found out that even in China, this newly emerged company like CATL, BYD, or other newly emerged the renewable energy company, they have no union even in China. So ACFTU cannot even organize workers inside of those companies. So which means we have no access currently right now to the workers who are working in the Chinese multinational company regarding the renewable energy industry. So this is a kind of big question for us that we need to very much careful, and we need to develop our discussion how to organize those workers. So our main goals for the building union power in the supply chain of the renewable, I would like to propose following point. One is maintain existing membership in today's energy sectors and recruit and organize in the sector of renewable energy, including all related services, including maintenance or the grid services, because those areas that we are expecting new jobs in the future. And also, we would like to achieve decent working condition for all workers in the sectors of the renewable energy and its supply chain through the collective bargaining agreement, including safeguard measures, for example, job security, working condition, and social security, etc. And we would like to make the workers' voice heard and inspire the discussion on energy transition and all related aspects among all stakeholders. So this is kind of our main goal for how we can build union power in the future in this supply chain of renewable. So now I would like to propose some possible next step towards developing strategy and creating a union network. So right now we are in 2021. So this is a kind of possible next step from starting from next year. So in the next year, early next year, we would like to deepen research about this supply chain of renewable. And we will try to map out the unions where our affiliate unions are located in the supply chain of renewable. Then after that, we will make an international discussion, and we also make a discussion in each sector and cross-sector activity. Then we will think how we can create effective trade union network around this renewable sector. And we maybe have able to have this training on the energy transition and just transition. So especially in the developing country, we just heard from India, from Tanzania, for example. As a union, we can maybe provide some education training program for the unions in the developing country on the energy transition and just transition, then make a proposal on how union can get involved in the democratic discussion within the country. Then we also need to provide information on the safeguard measures. When it comes to renewable energy sector, then this is already also heavily get involved in the discussion of the just transition. So mainly the just transition measure. So we would like to provide information of the safeguard measures on the just transition, if possible. Then hopefully, and after we collect those research mapping and training education material and also the information on the safeguard measures, then we can set up some kind of policy toolboxes that each union can use anytime they want. Then, of course, just throughout the year, we need to exchange good practices among the affiliate in the sector and across sectors. As you know that each sectors like mechanical engineering, energy sectors, ICT electronic sectors, we regularly have our sector meetings. So we need to exchange good practices around the supply chain of the renewable energy, especially the good practices of the just transition. And we also need to develop a social dialogue with employer and government, which we haven't done yet so far. So we need to deepen our research on the renewable energy. Then once we map out our unions in that supply chain, then we need to strategize how we can develop the social dialogue with employers and government around the supply chain. Then we need to engage with the stakeholders and international organizations. I think IRENA is also the good example that we need to engage with those international organizations, but not only for that, but we have lots of international organizations we are already engaged with, such as ILO. ILO will have a tripartite meeting next year on the energy transition, so we will also get involved in that discussion. Then we also need to active participation in the decision-making processes at all levels, not only the international level, but regionally, nationally, and company level. So this is kind of our possible next step toward developing strategy and creating trade union network in this supply chain. So I finish my presentation. Yeah, we would like to continue to engage with IRENA on this, helping your research, and also we would like to engage to help our workers to get a decent job in the future in the supply chain with renewable. Thank you very much for your comment. We have 2 minutes left. As you remember that, Diana's last slide, we had some other question for the comment. So one is, what do you know about renewable energy? The second one is your country investing in the renewable energies? And number 3 is your union already involved in those sectors? And number 4 is, does your union represent workers, renewable sector and the company? And number 5 is, what are the main challenges for your union working on the energy transition? So if you want to make a final comment or the question around this question, then you can do it now, or this will be your homework actually. And early next year, as I said, we will make a union mapping around this supply chain with renewable. So keep in mind, this question will come back to you. So if you have no questions, comment, then I will move on to the next final section, which is summary and conclusion. So now I will give the floor to our General Secretary, Atre Hoye, for the final summary and conclusion. So floor is yours, Atre.
Thanks a lot, Kan-san. I would start this summing up by the words of Ulrike Lehr at her final intervention here. It is about saving the world. Climate change is taking us to disastrous proportions if we don't do anything to save the world. So this is the humongous tasks that we are up against. And the question is, what can we do to do that? And what we have learned and what we understand is that there is a huge transformation that is going to happen to make sure that we are part of saving the world. And this transformation is about getting away from fossil fuels and into renewable energies. That's one of the important aspects of the transformation. So I think that it's extremely important that we now have managed to bring together a lot of our affiliates to start this discussion. Khan has presented a quite a long-term plan going 4 or 5 years ahead. And even at that point, we will still discover new things that have to be dealt with. 25 million new jobs, maybe. That is more than IndustriALL has members at the moment. And most of these jobs will be in sectors that are covered by IndustriALL. So we're looking at doubling our membership if we do everything right. This transformation is, as I said, huge. And I think the mapping exercise that we're going to go through in the beginning of this phase are important, because we need to learn what is actually happening out there. And all of our affiliates need to see what are the consequences in our countries, in our sectors, to see where the jobs are coming, what kind of jobs there are, how can we get involved in organizing and bringing our expertise into the discussion with governments, with the companies that are leading this development. As Khan said, we have GFAs with some of these companies that will probably still be big, but we might see companies in 10 years that we don't know about yet, that don't exist today, that will build up and become world leaders in some of these sectors. And we have to plan ahead on how to get into these companies, how to engage with them, and how to meet the workers that are going to be in these companies. So it's a huge project that you're taking us into, Khan, Matthias, Deada, but we have to do it. Both because it's about saving the world, but also because it's about making sure that these jobs become good jobs, well-paying jobs, with good health and safety conditions and good working conditions in general. That's why we are trade unions. So I'm really looking forward to following this process. It's going to be extremely interesting. It's very good that Ulrich and Michael want to be following this with us, or we with them, whichever way you want to put it, because we need the expert input on this. We need them to tell us, or to at least share with us, what they think is going to be the future, where the future is going to be, which countries, which regions, which industries. There might even be industries we don't recognize yet that will come up and be part of the solution to this problem. Hydrogen, for example. So we need every day to be updated on the technologies and to see where we're heading, so that we can make sure that we are trade unions for those who enter into the industries. So I think with that, Khan, I leave it to you to close, but this will be really interesting.
Well, thank you very much, Atole-san, for this concluding comment. Since our General Secretary has made a conclusion, so I have nothing to add, actually. But once again, I would like to thank you to the, the Dr. Ulrike Lea and also Mr. Michael Lehner from IRENA. And this was very, very wonderful moment that we can explore our future